Okay, so that's all started recording for us. So welcome to our user group today. I imagine that there'll still be people joining, but I'll just start with a few intros to start us off today. So hi, my name is Jenny Martin, and here with me today is Jack Parry as well, one of the other Prep user group leaders. And we will have speakers Christina Gorga and Jared Flores, who also helps to run the Prep user group too. So we've got some great sessions coming up for you today. As you know, this is our user group, which is suitable for the Europe and the Americas. So that's why we're at this time. We aren't joined today at the moment by Beth Carries because she's over in our APAC region in Australia. But these are the leaders for the Tableau Prep user group. So if you have any questions at any point or you want to reach out to one of us, then please feel free to, and we'll be happy to help with anything that you might want help with. Okay, so a couple of announcements before we get started with the talks today. So you've probably heard all about Tableau Conference being in May this year, in the 9th and 10th and 11th of May in Las Vegas. So make sure that you register now if that's something that you're interested to do, so that you can save $200 at the moment if you register. So yeah, get registering. And I personally am definitely going to be going to Tableau Conference and I can't wait. So looking forward to hopefully getting together with some of you there. And something else that's exciting in the next few coming soon is 2023.1 is soon to be released. And what that means for Tableau Prep is that we're going to get a source row number in the input step for CSVs and for Excel files. So that's going to be really useful to help maintain the order of that data, because I'm sure if you've worked with Tableau Prep before, you've realized that sometimes certain steps will reorder the rows, and maybe we want to keep it in the original order that we had it in. So that can be really useful and allow us to do more multi-row calculations in our workflows. So that's going to be really exciting when that comes out. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into that. And the other change that's coming is just some improvements in our input step that we can look forward to. So it means that we'll be able to multi-select some of those fields, so that if we want to remove lots of those fields in the input step, then we can do that a lot more easily, which is going to make it nice and simple. And we'll also have relative date filtering in our input steps, which is going to be kind of cool. So you can say, oh, only bring in the most recent week's data, so that maybe if you're just bringing the most recent to append to the bottom of your table, then that could be a really useful thing. So that'll be an exciting change too. If you're haven't done already, then the Tableau Prep Playground is our Slack channel where we have all the things related to Tableau Prep. So you can use this URL to go there to join. If that's something you're interested in doing, you can ask questions, you can chat with Tableau Prep dev team at Tableau, so much more. Find out about all the events that are going on as well that are related to prep. So please do sign up there if you're interested. And finally, if you're interested in presenting at a Tableau Prep user group in the future, so our next one will be in April. It'll be crossing over the European time zone with the APAC time zone. If that sounds like something you'd love to present at, then we'd love to hear from you. So you can follow this link here to suggest a talk that you might like to do, or even to suggest a talk idea that you think would be good to hear from somebody about. You can do that too. But without further ado, let's get started with today's topics. So as I said, I'm joined by two wonderful speakers today, Christina Gorga and Jared Flores. So Christina is going to talk about how we can de-identify data using Tableau Prep, which is a super useful use case that I'm sure many people have had to do at some point in their careers. And then Jared Flores is going to be talking to us all about hockey data. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot about hockey, because currently my knowledge is pretty much zero. So can't wait for that later too. So Christina, would you like to share your screen and take over?
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to the show today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Thank you. Awesome. And I apologize in advance. I told the lovely host today that my voice has been kind of going in and out. So just bear with me a little bit today as I'm kind of working through, I don't know what this is. All right. I'm going to go ahead and do this here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then voila. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. Cool. All right. For today's talk, I want to chat a little bit about de-identification. And some of you probably, if you're at all working with clients and you are working with, maybe existing dashboards, you want to show your amazing work from other projects, you may have to basically either fake your data. And if you don't want to start from scratch and use maybe some existing data that you already have, this is a great method to do. And so as someone that I would say is like a relatively still beginner to intermediate Tableau prep, I feel like this is a good use case for someone that may need to use prep occasionally in addition to other data wrangling tools. So this is a good sort of segue to figuring out some of the key tools in Tableau prep. So without further ado, let me go ahead and switch through. And just a tiny little bit about me. I am a lead data designer and strategist here at Booz Allen Hamilton. We are primarily a federal sector US consulting firm based out here in the Washington, DC region. I myself live in Northern Virginia, about 45 minutes outside of DC. I have been a Tableau social ambassador now for about going on 2 years now. I am also one of the co-leads of DataFamCon, which is a fun little monthly community challenge where we put together a lot of like nerd and pop culture data sets for folks. And for example, I think for this February, we're doing like romance reality TV show data. So check that out if you're at all interested. And it's hard to believe, but I've actually been a Tableau user for over 7 years now. I first opened my Tableau license back in 2016. So 2016 to now, yeah, it's almost 7 years. So time flies when you're definitely having fun. And Tableau and all the things in and within the tools are, I'm finding more and more things that I'm learning even over time. So, just in general, like my likes, what I really focus on when I'm talking about data more broadly, I really love community building, capacity building, for teams. I'm one of my big passions right now is enablement and training, really trying to figure out where organizations can build on existing systems that they do have for their people. And then also on the fun side, I am a collector of vinyl, and I am also a collector of vintage and thrift clothing. So actually the stuff that I'm wearing today is actually all vintage. So might as well, even when I'm on a screen, wear something fun. So as I was touching it a little bit on the first page is like, why should you de-identify your dashboard? So one of the main reasons I usually tell people that you should is that it makes sharing with potential clients really easy. You can basically use existing work that you already have with your dashboard templates and just swap the data in and out with fake names or, realistically fake names for, some of your, PII or PHI data. And then also the nice thing about that too is that you'll always have examples to share. So it makes it really easy to just do demos once you've done that initial step of de-identifying your data. So that way you always have something ready to go and share. And then the other reason too is that portfolio, a lot of things like the real world fake data. A lot of people may start out with using an actual use case that they've done for work. And then they say, oh, I actually want to de-identify this data so that I can actually share it with, on Tableau Public. So if you're thinking about expanding your portfolio to include maybe some of your business dashboards, this is a great way to do it. And one of my motivations for this actually comes from an actual problem that I had back in December. And it prompted a just a general wondering if people were curious about doing de-identification with prep. And so I had a request come in from another adjacent team, not on my direct team within Booz Allen, and they said, I would love to be able to have this dashboard or set of dashboards as an example of some great work that we can use in our corporate quality office, but we would need to change out the data. So I thought to myself, What's an easy way to do that without, having to do it all from scratch or using, like random calculations and Excel to do that. So I thought about it for a little bit and I did some searching, and then I found out that, the solution was actually fairly, quick and easy to do. The goal for me was to use Tableau Prep to shift the bulk of the de-identification effort from that manual labor I was doing previously in Excel, as well as, doing like snippets and like, putting gray boxes over things. It just wasn't a good use of my time. So my solution inspiration actually comes from an existing one that's out there. There is another Tableau user named Eric Parker, his blog post. I will put it into the body of the chat here in a little bit. But that's actually primarily how I was able to modify his existing example for my own use. So most of what you will see in his adjoined blog post is pretty similar. I think there's maybe some differences in the in-between steps that I did for my practice here that I'm going to show you that are a little bit different, but the bulk of it is pretty much the same. So kudos to Eric, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have had this idea to use Tableau Prep actually for this. So I will really quickly kind of walk you through what the steps would look like. And if you are not familiar with Mockaroo, one of the things I will be showing you is just in general, like how to use Mockaroo. It's an actual website if you're not familiar with it in the past. So primarily this is broken down into 2 different steps. And there's actually going to be 2 different flows that you're going to be doing here and putting together. So there's going to be first an initial one that you're going to do that's going to actually input your original data into Prep. And you're going to use a grouping aggregate function to get suppressed values. And I'll walk you through a little bit about what that exactly means. Mainly just to get a row level number of how many rows you want to generate with that fake data. And then from there, you'll go into mockaroo.com to identify and create new column names. And what the cool thing about Mockaroo is that they have a ton of different options based on like what kinds of identifiers or things you want to mask in your data to make it look as realistic as possible. And then the last thing is that you're going to do is you're going to bring it back to Prep, and you're going to do a separate flow that's essentially going to do an inner join with the original data to that Mockaroo data, and then you're going to do some additional cleanup. And then after that, it's pretty simple, and then your data file is ready to pop into your existing Tableau desktop or server if you're doing a published data source. So without further ado here, I'm going to switch into, let me go into switching to my other screen here. Okay, and what you will see here, I'm in Tableau Prep. And so what we'll usually do is you'll go ahead and you'll want to actually enter in that first data set over here for your input step. And then what I usually do, as I usually do with everything, is I do sort of an initial cleaning up of anything I want to filter out for the data that I'm actually going to be using. One thing I always like to consider too is maybe even using like a subset of your data if you're going to be doing any kind of dashboard solution that you want to put for a demo, but that's sort of aside from the point. But the key thing here is that after that initial, if you decide to do a clean step, what you'll want to do is click the group option, and I'm just going to go into this for example. You'll want to select the aggregate function, and what that's going to allow you to do, and I was mentioning this earlier, is that it's going to allow you to do this suppressing of the row steps. So when I click on this, it'll show you which ones I've actually decided to group for my actual names for the different columns that I want to have aggregated. So at the row level here, you'll see that it's actually set at the lead name because usually, there may be more people assigned to, in this case, this particular project or contract than others. So I wanted to use that to sort of guide how many lines in the data I need to tell Mockaroo to generate. And so that's kind of the key point. So if you're thinking about this a little bit further, think a little bit about, to the granularity that you want to actually input for that demo data. So I usually say, at the lowest level that you want to do, suppress it at that, and then, bring in however many of the columns that you want to actually have basically made into a fake column in Mockaroo. And then I usually just spin out the output just so I can see what it's going to look like. So here when I do sort of my reveal of the data, it kind of shows me what that's going to look like. And so from there, we can go into, and I'm going to switch back into our first screen here. And we're going to go into Mockaroo. And mockaroo.com, it's just there up above at the URL here. What I usually like to do is I first look at, when I was in Tableau Prep, I figured, okay, maybe I'll just choose like a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 different columns that I want to have basically faked to generate. And so that will be the ones that I replaced from the original PII or PHI. So maybe, for example, and this is the cool thing, is you can look at and figure out what kinds of fields you want to include. So what I usually like to do is I go to maybe go to another field. You can decide whether or not you want to include something else. The nice thing too is if you click on that little button, and I'll go back one step in case you didn't see, there is this little toggle that you'll see over here. It looks like an up and down button. And so from here, it wasn't clear to me the first time that I ever was in Mockaroo, but it's good to know. If you are deciding that you don't want the initial field names that you always come to in your Mockaroo home screen, you can choose basically a whole different range of things that will look very realistically like your data that you're actually going to be having in the completed dashboard. So in my case, I usually like to do something like, okay, I'm going to have a name. Maybe like I want to do, usually I think that, yeah, there's the full name option. So I would choose full name. And then maybe I want to, and this is where you actually name the field name. So I kind of actually go backwards, is I first choose the type, and then I may choose the name. So like I may say contract POC or something like that, just so that it looks realistic to what I might be seeing in the actual data. And right now it says first name and last name, but so maybe, for example, here, I'm going to X out of that. Maybe I want to have, some form of another ID that I already brought into the data. Maybe I just want to go into selecting ID. I think that there's like a number of other different options too. There's also like, you could do like a regular expression. You could do a number of things. I think sometimes also, even just going into the basic options, you can kind of see like the different variety of things here. Sometimes I'll do a sequence. Sometimes I'll just do like a combo of, it depends if it's like a description. Sometimes I'll do some paragraphs and then I'll tell them, how many different words I want to generate in there too. Yeah, you can kind of see that there's a lot of different things that you could probably go searching for. The nice thing too about Mockaroo, say for example, you're working with any geographic data that would be used as site identifier. They do also have location related data too. So, and then also for my purposes, I also worked a lot with healthcare data. So if this is something that you want to actually use for, procedure codes, things like that, really easy to do because it already gives you kind of a bunch of different options already. So that's kind of an overview of that. Let me go ahead and add out of that, but just for the purposes here, the key thing I would say is that you'll want to, there's this section right below the field names where you'll want to generate the number of rows. Now you remember when we went back into our initial prep output, it generated 29 rows. So you'll want to generate from that CSV to that, what that's going to look like. And then what I usually do, and it's kind of hidden like all the way down at the bottom, and you guys might not even be able to see it here, but there is basically a download data option down at the very bottom. And what I'm going ahead and doing right now is I'm just clicking download, and it's just showing up here on my side download bar here. And this is going to open up in Excel. Hopefully it opens up in this window. And so you can see already here is that you can basically look at this, you can modify it. And what I sometimes do too is I will literally bring in the column, and this is maybe the only most manual process that I will do, is I will take that initial output from that first prep flow and literally just copy and paste each one of those, excuse me, each one of those 3 rows in the data that I actually want to connect and make, excuse me, and make sure that those are all connected to each other. Excuse me. Let me just go ahead and X out of that. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so for the last step, I kind of want to walk you through what goes on in the second flow. And so what we have here is we have the original data, and I also bring in that mock data, the data that was generated via Mockaroo. And this is the key step, is I'll do this join Mockaroo step that's an inner join, and it's basically going to generate only the ones that match between the two for whatever, joining thing. So in this case, I use task order name, but whatever you want to use is your primary thing to match between the two. And then what I also do is I do sort of like a final check data set where I get rid of and I delete any of the original columns in the data that I do not want to show up in that final demo, so that you're only left with the ones that were generated via Mockaroo for the columns that you don't want to have associated with the person anymore. And so then you have the output, excuse me, guys, and then you can go ahead and run that flow. It'll generate that output for you. And then you can pop that into any of your existing Tableau dashboards that you plan on doing from that front. So that concludes, and let me go back into here. Lots of screens here. And so that pretty much concludes, and I'm going to be happy to send this PDF off to the prep team here so that they can share this afterwards, so you can walk through step by step. I have screenshots of everything and what you should do as you're going through it. And of course, you can reach out to me. I'm Style Steamed on Twitter, and I'm also on Tableau Public, same name. And then I also do some blogging on TypeShare, so you can find me there. But I hope that this was helpful. I think that a lot of people are always surprised at all the different things that you can do with prep to make your life a little bit easier. And trust me when I say this, is that when you have existing stuff that you really want to share with other people, this just eliminates a lot of extra work that you might have to do. So I'm hoping that that is helpful for folks, and hopefully that was fairly straightforward. And that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing that, Christina. I agree that I think that that's a super useful use case for how to use prep. And I love how kind of simple your prep flows make it. Like it's not something that anyone's going to look at and think, that's so many steps and tools and I can't. It's like a really deceptively simple way of just updating your data so that you can then share those dashboards and share your great work with what you're doing. I feel like I should get some data schools to watch and see just how simple it can be. Definitely.
Thank you.
I liked as well to see that you always add in a clean step after you input the data, just have a look. I always love to do that as well, because just having a look before you start doing anything is
it's so funny. Everyone has their little like quirks and features for like what they do when they go into prep. For me personally, I've seen a lot of people where they don't do that, and for me it's just like a way for me like mentally to think about, okay, this is the state of my data currently, and if I need to do any initial things, and as I was mentioning before, as usually for demos, I usually like to do even like a smaller subset of my data. And so that allows me to do any filtering and any, initial transposing that I might need to do before that. I wanted to eliminate any other additional stuff just to keep it simple and easy for this demo. But yeah, there's so many different ways that you can use this, but I'm always like pleasantly surprised. And this is coming from somebody that doesn't use, and I mentioned this earlier, I don't use prep a whole lot. But I found that this was a good way for me to sort of like get my feet wet without too much trouble, but then also incorporating existing tools that I already had at my disposal. So, and yeah, so it's fun. I know I'm like saying this, I'm like, it's fun to do. And I'm sure that the funny thing is when I was doing my research on this, other tools like Alteryx, I think have some similar functionality where you can actually build in de-identification into your flows without going to an outside tool. But because Mockaroo is so easy to use too, you can tell there's like a whole different number of different like customizations that you can do, you know, even within then, and then bring it back into prep, that I'm like, it's not too much of a problem for me. So if you're ever feeling like I don't feel comfortable using prep, this is a good way to kind of insert yourself into the tool, get used to it. And then also the nice thing too is I really love the visual component of being able to like preview my data. That's always been one of my favorite things about Tableau Prep compared to other similar tools. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Tableau Prep kind of keeps the nice visual UI of Tableau Desktop and just helps ease that transition over into data prep. Definitely, I would agree. Cool. If you have any questions for Christina, there aren't any in the chat at the moment.
I had a question.
You had a question, Jack, before you disappeared, Christina?
Yeah, well, Mockaroo might be a tool that's new to people and it's really useful. I use it a lot, but I wondered if you had any sort of like top tips for making use of Mockaroo and people picking up the tool.
That's a good question because I actually have only started using Mockaroo. I guess in terms of like best tips is that if you're really looking to incorporate something realistic is to, you know, just look at maybe some examples of what people have generated from like similar fake data tools and then utilize some of the existing column names that they have. The other thing too is, you know, the nice thing is that you can really modify things like, you know, the column names and things like that. So making things look as close to as possible is what you need. But yeah, it is interesting. And one actually, because I gave a similar talk at the analytics tab last month. And one of the questions that was brought up is like, is my data safe in there? And I'm like, well, the funny thing is that you're really not like putting your data in a repository in Mockaroo. You're literally just generating, you know, a series of like rows and columns that, you know, you can embed and basically merge with your existing data that's outside of it. So that's the other thing that I learned too, is that there's, you know, it's not storing your, you know, private data anywhere. So there's no concerns about privacy, as I found with Mockaroo compared to maybe some other tools, comparable tools that are out there. So I feel like it's a pretty easy thing for a lot of us that are working with, you know, say for example, government data. In my perspective, it's a great way to do that without having, you know, low code, no code options. So it blends really well with Tableau Prep. So I feel like it's that nice sort of like balance of the two. And I think for myself coming in as what I would consider is like a non-programmer, I find that the sort of the balance between those two tools is a really nice sort of joining. So.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's a really useful tool to have, but it's also a very straightforward one to pick up. For anyone that's not used it, they've got really nice sort of like clear categories to data that you might want to add into your data set. So it will auto generate, you know, company names or departments within a business. There's loads and loads of different varieties of fields that you can put in there, and can be really useful for supplementing your data, or in this case, de-identifying it. Cool.
Thanks so much, Christina. Okay, Jared, over to you.
Alrighty. Yeah, definitely always love talking prep. And specifically, I've always been a big fan of hockey. And it's been sort of it's been a project that I've wanted to work on for a while, of working with hockey data. I mean, I'd seen some blog posts here and there. And there's a couple of people specifically in the hockey analytics community that are more well known, and some of them use Tableau. And so I just thought, you know, I really love hockey. I've created a couple of hockey vizzes in the past, but I'm really interested in getting to the data. And so, you know, I had found out through some blog posts that the NHL actually has a public API and there's so much information in it. Like, it's all free. It's updated pretty much real time. I've kind of played with it side by side. So if I'm watching a game and run my flow, I'll have the most recent shot, maybe with a 30-second delay. So it's pretty amazing the information that's in there and how fast you get to it. And it's all there for anybody to use. And so, yeah, I thought first I wanted to see, can I extract it, clean it up, and create something with it. But then once I had kind of gotten to that point, I really wanted to see how far I could push it. And then, using a bit of Python to extract the data and do a little bit of cleanup, but then using Prep to really format it in a nice way that I could work with it in the way that I wanted to. And so I'll start sharing my screen. And share. So yeah, so this is from the NHL website, and it's just, there's a stats page that you can, there we go. Oh. Am I still here? I'm getting some errors on my side.
You froze a couple of times, but I think that you're okay.
We're good? Okay. Yeah, so this is the NHL stat website, player stats. And so this is something that I've kind of glanced at a few times. It's pretty, they've got all of the team designs depending on the player's team. Got their picture up there, some basic stats. And then really down here is where they start to list like their current season stats. And here, let me use this to make it. So they've got current season stats here, what the stats looks like for the last 5 games. And so you've got goals, assists, total points, plus minus, penalty in minutes, power play goal, shorthanded goals, and then shots, total shifts, and total time on ice. And then they've also got that down here, as you scroll down further, they've got this game log. So it's the same sort of breakdown that's here in the last 5 games, but it's for every game so far in the season, and it's sorted by the most recent one. And so this was sort of my base, like, I wonder if I can just pull the data and get to this. And so the API is actually, so this is the API here. It's this statsapi.web.nhl.com/API/v1. So this is the base URL for the API. And this link that I've gone to /configurations, this actually lists out all of the different configurations that for different pieces of information that they have stored in this API. So you can see that first one, configurations, just lists all of the endpoints. And then down here, we start to get to all of the endpoints. So there's player status, languages, the game types, and really the main ones that I ended up using in my code were, I believe, schedule types to get a list of all of the games that have happened so far. See, positions. I used rosters. I used event types. And so like there's a bunch of stuff in here, and a lot of it, it's a lot of good information, but they've built it in a way to where, for example, standings types, you can go in and just get current conference standings or current division standings or current league standings. They've got stat types, which would allow you to say, pick a player and look at their current stats at home, and then current stats away, or on the power play or on the penalty kill. So there's a lot of really cool endpoints here, but a lot of them are kind of, they're really specific in their use case. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to get to a point where I could say, I've got a list of every team, I've got a list of every player on that team, and then I've got a list of every single event for every single game for those players. And interestingly, at this time that I was working on this was actually when ChatGPT was really starting to blow up and a bunch of people were using it. And so I decided, I wonder if I can use this to help me, because I probably could have spent a bunch of time going in and figuring out exactly do I write the Python code, because I'm very beginner level. And so I thought, I wonder if I can just send ChatGPT this URL and tell it exactly what kind of information I want. So that's what I did. I went to ChatGPT and I said, using this API or this URL, write me a Python script that gives me the team list, the players on that team, and then all of the play-by-play events for all of those players. And what I ended up with was this code here. And so that's what it does. This is mostly the way that ChatGPT sent it to me. I did have to make some adjustments because it's working on outdated versions, and it's also working on some assumptions of when you pull in some JSON data, this is exactly the way it's going to be structured. So there was some adjustments I had to make to exactly how it's kind of pulling into the layers of nested JSON and extracting that data out. And I'll actually show an example of that too. So actually, if I take, so let me take this URL and go back to that page. Where was it? So if I go there and say, let me look at teams /25. Ooh, look, I've actually already got some examples here. What about games? Feed. Here we go. So this URL that you see, v1/game/this 2019-02-0873/feed/live. So this is the endpoint to get the play-by-play data for one game, and that this ID here is the ID for that game. So if I go here, this is what the play-by-play data for the game actually looks like. So there's a bunch of different levels here, right? So you've got the game PK, which is the ID for the game. And then you've got the game data level, which contains the PK, the season, so 2019-2020 season, and this R, which is the type of game. So there's R for regular season, P for playoff, and then PR for preseason. Date times, the time the game is scheduled to start. And then there's the teams level. So this contains it's split. So right here, you can see teams and then away. So this would be the away team in here. And then it's got more stats. So the team, the ID of the venue, the team's abbreviation, location. So it's got all of this franchise information, which, like I said, there's so much information here that you could use for some really interesting things. But what I was really after was just the away team. And if I come down here, there's this home team here. And then down when I get here into players. So this one shows all of the players that played in this game. And so I messed around with that one, but really what I found more useful, if I scroll down a little bit, go past this. Okay, so here, where to go? Right here, live data. So this live data level of the JSON data has all of the play-by-play stuff. So every single event in the game is captured here, even the game being scheduled, the period being ready to play, the period starting, and then if there's any players tied to the event, that's when you start seeing these coordinates here, and then the player associated with those coordinates, and then what type of event happened. So you can see in this case, this player was the winner of a face-off here against this player, because this player is the loser. And then it even has the description here, Jason Dickinson, face-off won against Jordan Stahl. And so that was my first challenge of, okay, that's wonderful data, but I need to clean it up and get it first into just columns and rows. And then from there, once I get it into columns and rows, I want to be able to get a tabular version that says, for Jason Dickinson, I can capture how many face-offs he's been a part of, how many face-offs he's won, how many face-offs he's lost, who he won them against, who he lost them against, what team the person he won it against was on, or what team the person he lost against was on, and what position they were. So all of these things I wanted to capture, but it's not that straightforward here, because the way that it originally captures this data is actually broken up into 2 lines. So since there's 2 players associated with this one event, there's 2 lines, one for each player, where one is listed as the winner and one is listed as the loser. So once I started kind of getting familiar with the data, what it looked like, that helped me make the adjustments to the code that ChatGPT gave me. Now, it did do a good job. If you actually look at this, the endpoints here, so you can see in this piece, this is the team ID. So what I'm doing is I'm going to that API and I'm going to the teams endpoint to get me a list of all of the teams. And basically saying for every team ID that exists, I want to pull that base information and then tie it to the roster. So you can see in the teams endpoint, there's the roster associated with it. And so when I run this, it'll go through, pull in the list of teams, and then pull in the roster for each of those teams. And I have to do this. So I run this every time I run the flow, and you would think, you know, the list of teams doesn't change, but the thing that does change is the roster. So you've got a lot of cap things happening, players being sent down to the minors, players being pulled up to the minors, trades happening. And so the roster can change from day to day. And what this endpoint, the data that it holds specifically, is what is the roster today. Now I could build something that captures the historical roster, and like for this span of the season, here's every player that's played for this team. But for me, for what I was trying to do, that data wasn't necessarily useful at the time. So I was just interested in what is the roster today. And so since that can change even leading up to the hours before the game, I kept this as part of the flow that would run with it. And then what you see is there's some normalization happening. So since the API has all the data in JSON, I have to normalize it and flatten it so that way I can get that column and row data. And so there's a couple of different elements in there. There's person, which captures the player's name, their number, their team. And then there's, you can see here, I've normalized a couple of other aspects, which is their number and their position. Now this headshot URL, I wanted to be able to, in my dashboard, I wanted to recreate this, right? I wanted to have the URL. And unfortunately, in the API, this URL, wherever this is stored, isn't actually a part of the API. So what I did was I right-clicked this, and then copy image address. And so I got the image address and then used that in my Python code. And I didn't know it would work. I just kind of made a guess, like if the image is stored there, I'm just going to make this assumption that every image is stored in the same way. And luckily it was. And so that worked out for me to where I was able to pull in the player images from that URL by associating it with their player ID. And then here you can see all of these columns that I've specified out. And actually, this was the way that ChatGPT originally gave it to me. It actually went through and specified each of the columns that needed to be a part of the data frame. Now, when you use this JSON normalize function, it actually already does that. And so I kept it in here because it happened to work. But in other iterations of this code that I've made, I removed this bit of it and just used the normalization function. And then down here, you can see here's the URL where the image is stored, and I just have to swap out the player ID to be able to pull in each of their headshots into the dashboard. Now, here, you can see this one is my game events by all players. And so this one goes through and pulls in all of the play-by-play data. And I know y'all are interested in the whole prep side of this. And so what this one does is it actually takes the play-by-play data, throws it into a data frame with rows and columns, and then changes the data type of each of those columns to something more specific. Just because when you're using the script step in prep, you have to use a function. You have to use this get output schema to define the data type that those columns should be when they're brought into the prep flow. And so I just go and cast each of the columns to the specific type that I'm going to want, just to make sure there's no issues, no type conversion issues. And then here in the get output schema, there's these prep strings, prep integers, and that's what I'm bringing it into the flow as. Now for the demo here, I won't be showing the script step because it loads every time you open it. Anytime you click on something, it starts running the script. And so just for performance purposes, I'm going to be working off of a CSV. So I'll open up the prep flow here. And so this is actually what my prep flow looks like. It looks pretty simple. It's just a bunch of clean steps, but there's a bunch of stuff happening in each of these clean steps. So much so that it tends to perform really slowly once I get to this step right about here. And so what I did is I actually had to split it up into 3 different flows that I run kind of in order through the command line. And so I'm going to open up the first one. I think it's this one. No, this one. Here we go. So this is my part 1 of the flow. And so I go from at least I get to the point where I'm formatting the hits. But I did want to show y'all what the data actually looks like as a result of that Python script. So you can see everything's nice and neat in some rows and columns. And I've got all of those events here. So you can see it's got blocked shots, face off. It's got hits, goals, giveaways, missed shots, penalties, shots, stoppages in play, takeaways. And so there's really awesome data in here just right off the bat. But then we get to that issue like I was talking about. So face-offs, I wanted to be able to track by player. Even when you're tracking goals, right? Goals have they have a scorer associated with it, and then they have whoever scored the goal might have had 1 or 2 players assisting them on their goal. And so that's other track information that I wanted to be able to track is you can see here in the events, there's goal, but there's no assist. But if I click here on the goals, then you can see here in the description, it says that this goal was a slap shot and it was assisted by Kucherov and Point. And so that information's there. I just have to extract it out to be able to say this goal was assisted by this person and this person. But then also this person has assisted this many goals for this player, and they've assisted this many goals for this player. And then same for hits. Who was the hit against? What position was it? What team was it? For penalties, was it a penalty taken, a penalty drawn? What type of penalty was it? Like all of this information, it's here in the description and also here in the event types. And you can see there's this event type ID, right? So this was a goal. But then if I come over here, there is a secondary type. And that secondary type shows me what type of goal it was. So slap shot, backhand, tip in, really nice information. So the first thing I did was format a unique ID, because since since one event can be captured on multiple lines based on the number of players associated with it, I wanted to be able to at least say, what is my unique ID for this? So that way, when I'm counting it on the dashboard, I'm counting it accurately and not duplicating anything. So all I did was just take the date of the event and concatenate it with this. There's this event ID and this event IDX. And so I just merged the date, the event ID, the event IDX, and then this result event code to get me my unique event ID. And that was the first thing. And you can see here, there's actually a bunch of changes too. I format the date, I create that ID. There was a couple of values that I needed to change to make sure that they were standardized across. So I grouped some values. I think down here, I got rid of something. No, I just kind of grouped my values and changed some types. And then you can see here why I added this field, player face-off team. And so if I go to that calculation, there's a bunch of stuff happening in here. So I'm saying if the event was a face-off and the player type was the winner, then I'm pulling in my team name as the face-off team. And this is because of the nature of the way the data is captured. So with face-offs, you got a winner and a loser, but the team name associated with both events is the team name of the winner. And so I need to make sure that I'm attributing the right team to the winner and the right team to the loser. And so I'm saying if the player here is the winner, then the team.name field is the correct team. But if I want to capture the team loser or the losing team of the face-off, then I have to say whenever the player associated with this event is the loser, then if I'm basically just saying which team is not the winning team, that's the losing team. And I have to do this calculation for pretty much everything because it works that way for all of the events. Whoever scored the goal, even if when you're looking at the line that tracks the goalie it was against, the team listed is the team that scored the goal. So I have to make sure, I'm trying to attribute the team that was scored against. And so when I go here to my format goals, there's a bunch of different calculations in here that are basically trying to make that assumption, right? Who was the goal scored against? Like what team was it scored against? What goalie was it scored against? What was the position of the player that assisted the goal? What was the player's name who assisted the goal? Who scored the goal? What team were they on? And then who were the primary and secondary assists for that goal? And that distinction is actually pretty important. But because I'm making assumptions here through the description, it's not, I'm not capturing it the way that I would like to capture it. And so in my dashboard, I don't actually represent primary or secondary assists because the primary assist is the person who touched the puck last, and the secondary assist is the person who touched the puck before the primary assister. So I would like to get to that data at some point, but for now, I'm just listing them out that way. And then the last thing I do here in this first part, and this might take a second to load, but I format the hits. And again, I'm just pulling out from the description, who was the player that was doing the hitting? Who was the player that got hit? What team were they on? And what was their positions? But yeah, and so I run this flow through the command line, and then it pulls into this, which is the second part of the flow. So I basically just connect to that first flow that I just ran. And then I start to format the face-offs. So again, pulling out the face-off, who was the winner, was the team, the position. But then I also add in this count to say, if I click on this person, then they've been a part of, at least a part of this sample, they've been a part of 3 face-offs and they've won all 3. And so I'm going to use that in my dashboard to calculate their face-off percentage. Same for penalties. I'm pulling out, again, who was the penalty on, who drew the penalty, what was their position, what was their team. And then I run this one through the command line, and then finally pull it through to this last part where I just add in some information. I'm just pulling out more information on the shots. And the reason why, again, I'm pulling out all of this information is so in the dashboard, I can have a clear distinction of everything. And also I'm not having to calculate all of these things in the dashboard. So I'm making it a little bit more performant. And then I want to have really informative tooltips that are able to clearly say, this person scored a goal against this goalie. The total score of the game was this. They were assisted by these players. This was the type of goal. Like I want to be able to put all of that information into the dashboard. So that's why I'm extracting each of these elements from every row. Now here I've got some shot on net columns because both shots that went in the net, shots that the goalie blocked, and then also shots that just completely missed the net and the goalie and hit the wall. All of those are captured. And so I plan to eventually incorporate that information, like what's their shooting percentage. There are other data sources that I need to incorporate that capture things like exactly where on the net their shot was aiming and if they beat the goalie or not. And so that's more all just oops. Howdy y'all, I'm back again.
Yeah, sorry, we lost you for a second there, Jared.
No problem. I think it's because I've got like 80 things running on my computer.
No worries.
So yeah, that's the prep side though. Pulls in all of that data, cleans it up. Like I said, right now I run it through the command line. I run it once a day. It pulls in information from yesterday. So that way, basically my dashboard has at least all of the data that came through as of whatever games happened last night. And so all of that comes together in this dashboard here. And so again, taking that inspiration from that NHL stats page, I've got that player URL or that player headshot up here, their name, their number, what position they play, their height, weight, their team with the team logo, where they were born, or when they were born, where they were born, and then what hand they shoot with. And then there's that last 5 games with the teams, their logos, date that those games happened, and then all of the stats associated with those games. Now I've got Connor McDavid up here because if you're not a hockey fan, Connor McDavid is considered the best player in the modern age. Wayne Gretzky is still the all-time best player hockey has ever seen, and so McDavid is commonly referred to as the modern day Gretzky. And he's having an absolutely insane season. So he's got 105 points so far, which I think the next best player has 80. And in the list of top 10, I think even the 10th person on that list is probably somewhere in the 60s. So definitely high above the average. And even this, if you look at this shot percentage, so he makes almost 18% of the shots that he takes, which is, again, it's crazy to see. But all of that information that we pulled in allows me to build this. So not only can we list out his stats that were on the stat page, which was what I wanted to get to originally, but we can also list out exactly where on the ice all of those goals have occurred. And then when I hover over one, I can see, okay, so he wristed a shot into the net against Anton Forsberg on February 11th, and it was a win. The total score was 6-3 versus the Senators. That specific goal was assisted by Draisaitl and Hyman, and it happened at 2:18 in the first period. And so that time of goal, I want to say that is not 2:18 left in the period. That means that 2 minutes and 18 seconds into the period, that is when that goal happened. So on the game clock, there would actually be like 17 minutes and what is that, 42 seconds left on the game clock for that period. So yeah, all of that information is listed out and we can see all of those goals. And then I've got some choices in here too for the rink. So you can look at it as a half rink, or you can say, I want to look at the full rink. So to be able to see between the 2 offensive and defensive zones where those goals are happening. Or you can say, instead of seeing just the specific pinpoint of the goal, I want to see how effective he is on a specific area of the ice. So I'm going to look at the density plot. And you can basically see if he's next to the goal, he's scoring. I mean, that's what that's telling us. But because in the prep flow, I went through and split out all of those things like the assisting person, their position, or the goal type, the team. Now I've also got these nice charts here where I can see Draisaitl is his most effective assister. So in hockey, there are lines. We've got 3 forwards and 2 defensemen on each line. And there's 4 lines per team. And so your best line is your first line. And so Draisaitl is one of Connor McDavid's line mates. So they're on the ice together pretty much all the time. And so it makes sense that Draisaitl would be one of his top assisters. But you can even see how deep down the team that he's getting assists from almost everyone on the team. And he's scoring. These are the teams that he's scored against. And so he's scored most against the Canucks and the Blackhawks. Most of his goals are wrist shots. And then here are all of the goalies he's scored against. And then if I wanted to, if I go back to circle plot, I can even see, if I click on Draisaitl, here are the goals specifically that Draisaitl has helped him with. Or if I click on the Canucks, here are the goals specifically that he scored against the Canucks. And then I basically got that list of information for everything. So here are all of the assists. And then again, this would be the teammate he's assisting. So he's passing the puck or in some way contributing to the goals of these players against these teams with these types of goals against these goalies. And then for hits, here's a round where he's making hits. And so these are the players he's hitting, team. And then for here, I just also added like which period is he making the most hits. And so he's more aggressive in the first period than he is in the middle of the game, but also resumes his aggressiveness towards the end of the game. And that could be for any number of reasons. It could be for fatigue. It could be to swing the game. McDavid is also the captain of the Oilers. And so sometimes there's a bit more aggression to try and rally the team a bit. And then we can see here penalties taken. So this would be any time that McDavid goes to sit in the penalty box, the type of penalties he's taking. And then it even, if you hover over, you can even see McDavid was called for hooking against Kucherov. It was a minor penalty. And so the distinction there, minor penalties are 2 minutes, major penalties are 5 minutes. And so you can just see what types of penalties he's taking and how much they're impacting the team. And then you can also see the reverse. How many penalties is he drawing? So whenever somebody on the opposing team takes a penalty against him, what type of penalties is he drawing, and are they minor, are they major, and where is he drawing those the most? And you can even see there's that collection there in the middle, and that's probably because when we go back up to the goals, that's where he's scoring the most goals. So people are incentivized to do whatever they can to stop him in that area. And then when we come down here, remember what I said earlier, I wanted to capture face-offs, be able to distinct between them, and that's why I could do something like this where I can say, in each face-off circle, so each of those donut charts that you see is a face-off circle, so somewhere where a face-off would happen, and we can see what his win percentage is in each of those areas. And so in the center circle, he wins 44% of the time. He's won 85, and he's lost 105 of 190 face-offs. And so we've got that nifty little chart that we can keep track of there. Or if I wanted to, I can say, instead of looking at the location, I want a more detailed breakdown. And so I can see this list of what his face-off wins are by each opponent he's done a face-off against, or also what team he's against. Now, of course, if he's only done a couple, that's what the number in parentheses is the number of face-offs he's taken against the player. So if it's a low number, yeah, he's probably got a high percentage. And I've thought about filtering that out, but I decided to keep it in. But then once we get to players that he's taking more face-offs against, then you can start to see a more normalized face-off percentage. And overall, if we kind of reference that chart back up above, or if we reference the chart when we switch over, it does hover around that high 40s, low 50% range. And then of course, against all of the different teams. And so finally at the bottom, we've got the game logs, which replicate that game log view that was on the NHL page. And at first, this was a scrollable list. I changed it to be this page navigation because I'm using to get these logos inside the table. I'm using the image roles that were just recently released. And if there's too many of them in a view, it errors out, they kind of just show up as little triangles with the exclamation point. And so I just reduced it to where it's only showing 10 per page to try and get around that. And so, yeah, that is the way that I sort of captured, pulled that data, cleaned it up, what the result of it is. And there's still more, still so much more that I plan to add onto here. I talked about some third-party websites. So eventually I want to capture where those shots are hitting the net. Or in the hockey analytics community, there's a heavy focus on advanced analytics to truly measure based on goals, points. What do these things mean? Like, okay, yeah, he's got 105 points, but what does that mean for his effectiveness as a player? And is that good or bad? There's all kinds of models that are run to capture these things. A bunch of the popular statistics are expected goals for. And so this would be saying, based on this player's performance over time, this is how many goals that is expected of this player to get. And so the measure of how good they are as a player is actually against that. So this is the expected goals. Are they above it or are they below it? And if they're above it, how far above it are they? And so that's how the hockey organizations start to measure how good is this player really, and are they having a good season, are they having a bad season, or is their performance just consistent? And so all of those things I plan to incorporate and start just increasing how effective this is, not only for the everyday hockey fan, but for those that are really that really like to dig deep into it and understand, like, how good is my favorite player really, or my team's been really bad lately. I want to look at what the data says, and I wonder if they'll make any trades that kind of match my assumption on who's the better or worse players in their teams. And so, yeah, that's all I got for you.
Thanks so much, Jared. Like, I can tell how much passion and enthusiasm you have for this topic and this project. And yeah, it's really cool to see how you can take it from like beginning to end in that way. I feel like I've learned some things about hockey, but don't test me on them, please.
Yeah.
We do have a question in the chat for you that's relating specifically with the Python script that you had, and how was that actually getting into Tableau Prep, and was it using TabPy? Is that how that was happening?
So I have this script that does use TabPy and the script step to get into Prep. I actually don't use that flow as much, because when I need to go in there and edit something, it can be a real hassle to turn on TabPy and then wait for it to load. And so really what I do is I just run this script instead, which is the same thing, but the end result is that it exports to a CSV. And then in my prep flow, I just connect directly to that CSV. And so the way that I run it to make sure everything syncs up is on my task scheduler. I run all my Python scripts first, and then I think I have like a 30-minute delay, and then I run all my prep flows.
Okay, so is the reason that the scripting step isn't working out for you in Tableau Prep is it's just kind of always keeps calling the data as you're trying to go through?
Yeah, it's that. So if I need to make any adjustments to the flow, it's just I have to wait for it to load every time I click on something. I have other flows where I use Python and I use the script step, and once I've gotten them to a point where they're fine, then I can go ahead and plug in the script step, because I know I don't need to change anything, and I don't have to like try to synchronize the Python and the prep. But for now, I know that I have a bunch of changes that I'm going to need to make.
Yep.
And so I've just opted for connecting to the CSV for now.
That makes sense. Christina?
So this was really cool. My husband and I are big hockey people. I don't know if I've probably like posted to your stuff that you've posted, Jared. I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. But I have like a series of like 2 questions. So my first one is actually related to, you brought this up about the performance on when you broke up some of those steps. So could you, I guess maybe from a perspective of prep performance, because I know one of my, I wouldn't say it's like one of my pain points, but it's definitely something that I've been encountering, like as I've been dealing with like large swaths of data. And are you finding that there's some good documentation out there for, maybe certain kinds of calculations are, going to be more performant than others? So I'm just kind of curious, maybe you can share with others more broadly on this call, maybe some things you've been tinkering with, what's been working, what's not, and, ultimately why, you decided to do the things the way that you did.
Yeah, I've definitely been messing around with things like just in general calculations that are more performant in desktop. I try to mimic that, trying to simplify things as much as I can, trying not to do too many like nested case or nested if statements. But I just find, especially with this data, it was kind of the only way that I could break out the data the way that I wanted to. And it's the documentation part is a bit difficult, because when I've brought this issue up to the prep dev team several times, and the understanding is the way that prep should function, the way that they intend it to function, is when I click here and this little bar loads, now this data is cached. And when I click here and this little bar loads, it's loading from that cached data. And when I say so, it should function like that for each subsequent step. The problem is it doesn't feel like it functions that way. It definitely feels like if I make a change to this step, when I go back to this step, this one's going to reload. Or when I go back, like, you know, that's the way that it feels a lot of the time that I'm in it. And so, and like I said, when I go back to this one here, so this is just the same flow, it's all together. But if I click this and watch it work while I'm
and it like hangs.
Yeah, it'll just sit here. And I'm actually even connected to a smaller sample. I'm only connected to a CSV with 1,000 rows. And so I like this should not be happening with 1,000 rows. But at the same time, if you look at my changes, I've got 12 changes happening here, got 12 happening here, 15 here, 12 here, 21 here, and 14 here. But yeah, like it'll load here fine, but for some reason it just hangs here. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I actually prefer doing prep stuff on the web editor. I actually find it to be really nice and really fluid. But I also didn't want to go through the hassle of setting up my own server with TabPy to connect it and do all that. So just for this specific thing, splitting it up into the different flows was the best way for me to go through it, because then I'm ensuring that when I run the data up to here and load it in my second flow, that my second flow is not spending any performance, or it's just pulling in the data. And so yeah, it's something that I've asked about and definitely want to pick some brains more on the Tableau team, is like, you know, even when I'm doing sampling, even when I'm connecting to small sets of data, transformations and calculations get to a certain point where it starts to slow down, understandably, but what's the solution other than splitting it up?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like even as someone that's relatively new to using prep in my own work, I'm noticing like every once in a while I'll have like quirks with like certain kinds of calculated field types. And I sometimes wonder, I'm like, okay, is there like a good, not a Bible, but something that I can like compare and look at? Like, what are some good examples of things that are working really performant, you know, similar to their dashboard content? So that's one thing I think as like a on and off prep user, something that even teams that I adjacently work with would be really helpful. The other question I have for you is more of like a content one. So with your existing data, do you have the ability to, like, say, for example, look at a like a similar profile of another player? So you brought up like all those different metrics for like the current year. Could you hypothetically, because you were talking about some of those advanced analytics, like say this profile matches closely to like this other player on this other team? Because I think that would be a really interesting like deep dive too, because I imagine that there are probably either similar players with maybe like somewhat similar stats from maybe like a competing team. So like from my perspective, like because I'm getting excited now, I'm like, there's so many, you know, teams trying now to make the wild cards, including my husband's and my team, the Red Wings. And it would be really interesting to see, you know, like Dylan Larkin, for example, from like the Red Wings. I'm just gonna give a shout out to him. Like, who would his profile be similar to based on like metrics that you've grabbed? So I was like kind of thinking about that as you were showing them, like, oh, that would be kind of interesting if you did like pick this player and then have like something on the side that says this player more closely resembles this player based on your selections and based on these metrics.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I know that there's people out there that are not necessarily doing the side by side, but still measuring it in that way. So there's a metric called wins above replacement, which is another one of those, like, this metric is supposed to represent this player as a whole. And so that's kind of one thing that they'll do, is they'll kind of compare that number, that wins above replacement, among different players on different teams to kind of say, like, these two players are considered of the same caliber. And they could, now that the comparing them like positionally, like two centers positionally, you can still get to that. But I think what I see a lot of people do too is they'll start to take some of those individual metrics like the expected goals, and they'll start to just plot every player on that to say, like, this group of players that has a higher differential of expected goals, they're kind of considered among the group of elites. And this group is way below their expected goals, like, you know, probably getting demoted in the lines or some trade potentials there.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Love it.
Cool. And in that similar vein, just one more question for you, Jared. Is that dashboard that you showed available on your Tableau public?
Yes, it is. It is on public. I refresh it most days when I remember or don't forget to do it. So yeah, on my Tableau public, there is that the season stats dashboard. I also have a similar one so Dallas Stars for my team. Jamie Benn has just played his 1000th game maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And so this dashboard is very similar, but it has all of the stats and goals and assists and everything for his entire career instead of just the one season. So yeah, definitely some data there to explore and have fun with.
Brilliant, cool. Thanks very much for presenting then, Jared. Like, I'm sure that everyone, yeah, I found that very interesting. And I'm sure that those who are interested in hockey found it even more interesting. So thanks so much for presenting today.
Yeah.
Cool. And thanks to everyone else for joining today. We will be in touch with the recording when it's available. But otherwise, have a great rest of the day, everyone. And if you're over in Europe, have a great evening. If you're over in the US, enjoy your afternoon and evening too, and have a good weekend when you get there. Cool. So thanks, everyone.